Next, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Spira. You may know Jonathan because he has been involved with the Information Overload Research Group on the board with me for several years. He actually put on the first Information Overload Research Group event in New York, which is what got me involved in this group. That was back in 2008, I believe. Is that right? So a long time ago, there's this big article in the New York Times about how these people were coming together on this problem that was apparently sort of new in some ways. Not a new problem, but newly being explored in this way. At that time, Jonathan was the CEO of a company that's called Basics, which published so much of the data that we were all reading, all those statistics about the cost of interruptions in the millions and then ultimately into the billion-dollar figure per year for the US and world economy. So he also has done an incredible amount of research in this space. He also recently wrote a book that's called Overloaded, How Too Much Information is Hazardous to Your Organization, published by Wiley & Sons. You can find that on Amazon. And he, for the last few years, has been doing some kind of fun stuff. He founded a startup that's called Accurate Media, and he provides original content in travel, lifestyle, and automotive areas. So if you catch him in another city, he's probably driving around in a really fun car and staying in a really great hotel for cheap, or maybe they're paying him to be there. So it's really fun to have watched that transition with Jonathan. But he's here going to talk today about overload, a familiar topic to him, and really excited to have you, Jonathan Spira.
Thanks, Jared. And no, we can't be paid to actually be in a hotel we're reviewing. But okay, before I take that over, I found some research that ties into Gloria's. I found the original research that proved that there's a problem with Mondays, and I just wanted to share that before we move on. Hopefully this will work. That apparently is some prior art on Gloria's research. So it just, as she mentioned that, I thought of that. First of all, it is possible to become completely overloaded from spending 20 years doing research on information overload, which is why we made the decision to stop doing the research we were doing. It just literally got to the point where we couldn't do it anymore. How many people here have smartphones? Oh, wow, okay. Could you take them out for a second? Just, everybody, just bear with me. Oh, somewhat smart. So, how many people here actually know where the off button is on their phone? Okay, a few. Okay, I want everybody at the same time to push the off button down and hold it down, okay? Oh my God, the look of fear on some of your faces. It's not that bad for an hour, just trust me. Mine's off. So, I really wish I had actually not turned my smartphone off and taken a picture of some of your faces at this very moment, because the expression was a little bit telling. So let's see if this works. No, that didn't. Oh, so I'd like to first welcome you to the age of great impatience. One of the things I found in, thank you. One of the things I found in my research was a tremendous amount of impatience for things that grows the more you get information. I'd like to blame two people for this. There's a chapter in my book called The Two Freds. Here's one of them. Does everybody recognize him, by the way? This is Fred Rogers. So the two Freds are Fred Rogers and Fred Smith. Fred Smith, is people familiar with Fred Smith? He invented FedEx. So before FedEx, when you absolutely positively wanted to get something there overnight, you took it there. Today, he created, or starting in the 70s, he created a culture that thrives on instant gratification. Today, if you order something, you expect it at your desk tomorrow by 10. You're stalking the truck at 10:01. if it's not on your desk. Mr. Rogers, on the other hand, starting in the 70s, started to tell all the little brats how special they were. Everyone's special, which led to laws in California where apparently in the state everyone gets an award for everything. I'm mystified by that concept. Of course, I really don't blame Mr. Rogers completely or Fred Smith. I think, I'm using them, however, as poster children for a moment because I really think that the problem of entitlement combined with the tremendous need for instant gratification that we've developed has caused somewhat of a calamity. Just to give you an example, people today, and this is truly not an understatement anymore, feel that because what they have to say is so much more important than anything you could possibly be doing, they have no compunction whatsoever about interrupting you because you couldn't possibly be doing anything as important as whatever it is they happen to want to discuss. It's really clear. How many people find that situation to be something they encounter regularly? That's about all the room, with one or two exceptions. So I salute the 2 or 3 who have isolated themselves in a cell somewhere and can't be interrupted. When I talk to people about information overload for my book, I got some interesting quotes. Larry Bowden, who's a senior VP at IBM, said, information basically slows me down because I'm interacting with information that's irrelevant and out of context. Now, he's a senior VP at IBM. You would think that IBM employees would have magical access to better tools, but they don't. He's not immune. An industry analyst I know very well, Amy Wall, had said that it impacts her by making it impossible for her to get through all the information she gets. She writes about how to work with information, and this is what she said. And finally, a senior vice president at BMW of North America, Peter Miles, who is very attuned to the problem of information overload, gave me this. It's a scourge of modern day society. I think it's one of the best information overload related quotes I've ever been given, and extraordinarily accurate. So I'd like to discuss for a moment the workplace. Does this look familiar? This is how people still envision the workplace. It's a monolithic building where people go and work. In fact, here's some recent shots of people working. This is really, however, emblematic of how we still, from a scientific point of view, approach things. We look at this and we say, aha, this is the workplace, and let's do work because we do work here. That's not necessarily how we work. How many people would actually go to the same physical location every day on a regular basis, this place, to do work? That's about 3% of the room. Okay. So clearly, and I'm sure that we're not necessarily representative of how everyone works, but even if we allow for adjustments in our sampling here, there's a marked difference. So then, just to take a slight segue for a second, I always like to tell people about this movie. So that was the first information overload song from the Boomtown Rats. This is the first information overload and knowledge management movie. Does anybody know what this is? Sorry? No, you're close though. You got the characters right, John?
I was going to say Girl Friday.
No.
I know.
You got the characters right though. Let me try. It's Desk Set. If you haven't seen the movie, which it's really quite brilliant, it's about computerization at a large television network. And Spencer Tracy is the salesman from a slightly disguised IBM, trying to sell the network. And on the left, Hepburn plays Bunny. That's a name you could only really use for a character in the 1950s, I suppose. She's Bunny, the chief librarian. You just don't name people like that anymore. And and they end up, of course, having a sort of struggle between the worlds, which is resolved. And this is not at all going to spoil the movie for you, but they use the test question: what kind of car did the king of the Watusis drive? And that's to see if the computer can come up with a better answer than the librarians. So it's a specially modified Pontiac, by the way, just so you know the answer. But again, this is not going to ruin the movie. I strongly advise seeing. So we've been through the first hour. We haven't defined exactly what we're talking about. Everyone has his own information overload definition. This is mine. It's an excess of information that results in the loss of ability to do a few important things like make decisions, process information, and prioritize tasks. Those are possibly three of the most important things people who are knowledge workers, who are defined as people who work with knowledge in the information economy, do on a regular basis. It's a problem when you actually can't function to do this, but it's nothing new. A friend of mine, Conrad Gessner, warned of this 600 years ago. And this is what he had to say. He warned of a confusing and harmful abundance of books. It's a huge problem. Jared, could you just turn that facing me a drop? I just realized the teleprompter is off. Or you can turn the table so it doesn't, so your laptop doesn't actually die an early death. I know, that would be bad. Thanks. Appreciate it. And then, just 100 years later, Adrien Baillet came up with another reason to fear lots of books. It just, in every age, we've had too much information. This is nothing new. We're really not dealing with any new ground in many, many respects. We just have so many more ways of talking about it and distributing it than we did even 30 or 40 years ago. So I'd like to present a few things from the research we did, and I'd like to tell you a drop about the research. By the way, how many people here were at the first ever IORG meeting? That was in Microsoft campus. I just want to see how long. Okay. And the second meeting? New York, yeah. And other basics conferences, strategic thinkers conferences? I see him back, yeah, good. Just, so there's been, you know, so that we started doing research at Basics in the late 80s around the topic of knowledge sharing and collaboration. We found impediments, we just didn't know what they were. When I started talking to people about the problem of information overload in 1990, people looked at me like I had two heads or worse. It was not clearly understood why I was concerned, because how could you have too much stuff? How could this be bad? You have all this amazing stuff at your fingertips. And I started to talk about it more, and people started, I mean, it really made me want to go and hide sometimes. There were some rather unkind things said about the fact that I'm wanting that the emperor is naked, and people put their heads in the sand. I remember an interview I did in '91 with CNBC. The announcer starts off the piece, Jonathan Spira gets 150 emails a day. I think wistfully back to that time. Only 150. You know, if only that were the case now. But the amount of stuff we get, and you know, and of course then we, you know, at Basics we had some instant messaging and stuff, and we had, I mean, the internet didn't really exist in 1991. Email systems were struggling to connect to one another. You know, people were first figuring out the uses of what my friend Bob Kahn invented with TCP/IP. There's all this stuff that was going on that nobody quite understood. My brother had just invented the Internet Baseball Awards before there was even a web browser. So there were lots of things that were going on, and just people hadn't put any of the pieces of the puzzle together. Putting the pieces of the puzzle together gets you into trouble, however, as we found out. So by the time we figured out I'd say in the mid-90s that there was this problem, information overload, that was keeping people from getting their jobs done. There was, we had to figure out, well, what is this? What's going on? And I came across something in my research, which a couple of years later was, without, you know, intent, supported by other people's research, including stuff that Gloria came out with, that showed that there was this phenomenon of interruptions. I didn't realize what I was hitting on at the time. It was, I will confess, it was completely accidental. But the interruptions weren't the problem. It was something else. It was the time when your flow was broken to the time you got back to what you were doing. So I looked at this, and we found, wow, this is, on average, from all the research we were doing a lot of over-the-shoulder analysis and surveys and observations with people. I won't go into that because Gloria did a good job describing the techniques that we use. And we discovered that recovery time, which is the name I gave this phenomenon, is 10 to 20 times the amount of the interruption. Now, That is a huge challenge because there are all these tiny interruptions that occur throughout the day. And when you add them up, you don't really know what's going on, except that you feel like you haven't gotten a lot done. So, so here's a few statistics from the research that we did. We, at the time, and this goes back in 2009, an average, I think we said 28 billion hours is lost, and that's in the United States alone, these time figures. Just keep in mind, worldwide, it's more than double. So reading and processing 100 emails can take up to half a day. And finally, and this is based on the phenomenon of recovery time, it can take 5 minutes for someone to get back on track after a 30-second interruption. Just keep in mind, these are small, discrete things. You don't sit down and say, okay, I've been interrupted. I'm going to stop my recovery time now. Okay, in 5 minutes, I'll be back to you. It doesn't quite work like that. What really happens is it's in your unconscious, your brain is struggling to get back to where you are, and you don't realize what's happening. So let me take you, I'm not going to read this all out, I'm just going to show you. This is some of the things that can happen as a result of information overload. Everything Gloria talked about is real and scary. 10 minutes, thank you. The thing is that when I did all this, I was applying it, as Gloria is, in the business context. I didn't really apply it to life. I didn't actually realize, this is 5 years ago, people were not walking around saying, oh my God, I'm overloaded, and talking about information overload. That just wasn't going on 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Today, I was sitting last night in the club lounge in the Ritz-Carlton, and I was listening to a table next to me. And they were talking about how overloaded they were. I was just sort of being a fly on the wall. It was a couple, they were overloaded by life. They were overloaded by information. They were overloaded by too much about someone whose last name I think is Kardashian or something. I mean, when did all this happen? Well, there's been a transformation. It's not just in the business world. It's 24/7. And anyone, if you're not looking at this side of the coin along with your research, you're missing. If I was still actively doing research, I would be digging in this ground. So let's look. We know more about less. That's a huge challenge. There's just so much. How many people here can explain who this Kardashian person or people are anyway? Yeah, okay, good. I don't feel so bad. But you hear about it. It's like, they did this, they did that. They're on Jay Leno. Okay, that's great. It's mind-numbing to think, you know, we invent fake television and fake celebrities, and then we overload people on their news. It's a wonderful phenomenon if you're the PR person for any of these fake celebrities, because you get a lot of money for generating nothing about nothing, I would say. More importantly, however, I put together a little bit of a slide on why we hate work. There's an increased movement, I see, that people simply are not happy at work. And these are two statistics from our research. The second one is particularly poignant to me. And we've done this in 3 different surveys. Our surveys generally looked at anywhere between 1,000 and 5,000 knowledge workers, plus interviews of roughly 5 to 10% of that group, and some over-the-shoulder analysis at the same, subsequent to that. 94% of those we surveyed have felt so overwhelmed by information to the point of incapacitation. This is not a small thing. This is 94%. It is a very large number. Even, and I'm happy to admit, even if I'm off by half, it's a large number. It just doesn't get better. What we do about this is up to us. We are a group of people here who are interested in the topic of information overload. We have a research association, IOG, which Nathan and I helped to co-found. We are at the point where we need to help society deal with this, because it's no longer just an enterprise business problem. 66% of knowledge workers told us that they don't have enough time to get all their work done. No wonder why they feel incapacitated. This is all part and parcel of the same thing. And this may not be a surprise to you, but everyone still have their phone off, by the way? Okay, just checking. The workday never seems to end, especially for me. I mean, we were David Goldis, my business partner, and I were so overloaded by information overload that we picked something else where we could actually be overloaded in, starting a mini publishing empire. So now we rise and fall with news cycles. Well, that's cute, Jared. Thank you. Love the little tablet usage. Now I'm overloaded. That's a 30-second interruption. I'm going to have recovery time of 5 minutes, so I'll be back. This is a problem. This is a problem. Now let's look at something else. Tens of thousands of children under the age of 4 have been diagnosed with ADHD. Can anybody here explain this to me, please? How can you tell that someone under 4 really has ADHD? And I'm not saying this is a make-believe disease. I'm definitely an ADHD kid in many respects. But under 4? Dr. Diller, we're giving Adderall to 2-year-olds. I mean, that's nuts. I want to hug him. I want, this is, I hate to say it like this, but this is crazy talk. It makes absolutely no sense. Why are we all of a sudden finding that there is a new disease we have to treat, and we're giving out drugs where we have no data whatsoever on how Adderall and Ritalin impact people under the age of 4? Well, let's just give it to them and see. How many people here, if you don't mind answering, how many people here think they might have ADHD or some sort of thing? Okay, the rest of you, I'll just wink. I won't tell you your health insurance either. This is a serious issue. We're finding, to me, this is so emblematic of information overload as a problem for society that I'm almost speechless. I can't begin to tell you how shocked I am when I've seen the data, and I was so lucky that I came across an article in the New York Times quoting Dr. Diller, because this is just meaningful to me. So I'm going to stop for some questions now, but I'd just like to point out that, as you can tell by the Bowden symbol here, I'm clearly still interested in addressing the problem of information overload despite my new career. We do, of course, welcome you to visit our magazines, Frequent Business Traveler, which is at frequentbusinesstraveler.com, and if you're interested in green cars, thedieseldriver.com, the Diesel Driver magazine. We focus on electric vehicles, diesels, and hybrids. Although electrics and hybrids scare me because no one has still told me what we're going to do with those huge piles of batteries in 5 years from now. That's going to be another challenge. That having been said, I am enjoying greatly what I am doing now. I was a little worried I'd have separation anxiety from information overload, but I don't, and now I'm just overloaded like the rest of you. So, questions? Yes, John.
We always talk about information overload in the context of the technology. What's missing for me is the information age started in 1957 when the Labor Department said we now have more white-collar workers than blue-collar. And since then, in those 50 years, there's been very little adaptation, human adaptation to the new technology. Is there anything you see that's promising where we're able to not change so much the technology, because that's not going away, but really change and adapt behavior to information overload?
First of all, I'd argue that the information age started in Mainz 500 years ago. And I'd second argue that the title information age started in 1980 when a fellow who worked for AT&T coined it. But I'm not trying to be difficult on that. I'm just, you can, there's no good line for me for having started that. It's a progressive line.
The blue-collar, white-collar thing is what is generally accepted as the dawn of the
I have problems with that, but that's not, let me answer your question. You and I can always debate that later. We're good at that. I have not found any particularly satisfactory technology that addresses everything. There are technologies, a Wayfind, other things that address specific problems and are very good at it. I turn back and say, this is a people problem. This is a how I approach my job and information and how I allow myself to do things or not do things problem. This is why I point out the problems with diagnosing 2-year-olds with ADHD. This is the reason that I point out the social and societal problems. We are using technology to do what previously we used to do with everything from punch cards to ledger books to just sharing information. Gloria has pointed out that we're happier on Facebook than in some other aspects of some of the work we do, or make-believe work we do. So ultimately, I would say that we need several steps back and to refocus and look at the big picture of the type of work that's being done. Large companies have made huge investments in the wrong tools for the wrong people at the wrong time to address the problem. Does anybody here know what happens after email-free Thursdays, by the way? Email Tsunami Friday is what I call it. So there are lots of interesting experiments that the only one I can think of is something I wrote about in the research report we did with Intel when Nathan was the information overload czar there for many years. Setting a service level agreement for when you should reply to email. At Intel, it seemed that the culture demanded that the recipient should be writing the reply before the sender had actually sent the email. That is a huge challenge and something that was very hard for people to live up to. And I'm not joking. I mean, that really seemingly is what came across, in that people, if they were not hitting the reply button right at that moment, it was just a waste. Setting up an SLA which said most emails should be responded to in 24 hours is a good, healthy thing. I tend to respond to emails when I see them because I know that I will not respond to them later, but that doesn't mean I sit there with a Pavlovian response and go, oh, it's time to respond. I have to respond to this email. Oh my God. I've turned all the indicators off for email. I've done everything I can possibly can so I don't get interrupted, and you can have, in addition to someone knocking at the door, someone ringing the bell, someone sending you an email, you can interrupt yourself. Breaks are healthy though. I always get people saying, well, what about breaks? Breaks are very healthy. I think Gloria made that point as well. You stop, you go outside. People are healthier and less stressed if they take breaks. Karen, that's for you.